welcome here Professor Joachim Schellnhuber, one of the most important experts for the global climate changes and founding director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. It's been our pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me and announcing me. So, two remarks before I start. So first of all, it's very nice to stand here at a bar, a coffee bar, because Andrea Illy, whom I met in the Italian embassy in Berlin a while ago, is a very compassionate and very engaged man regarding climate protection and sustainability. And there's a reason for that, because with climate change, the best type of coffee, which is the sort Arabica, not Robusta, but Arabica, which you need for an espresso, will not be able to be planted anymore because it is growing uphill, and in Jamaica, for example, in Ethiopia and so on, and there is an end to it if global warming cannot be stopped. So you can assume that a coffee producer is very concerned about global change. So that's the one thing. The other thing is I'm very glad to be invited back to Prague. It's a fantastic city. Every time I come here, the city has developed further. It's very cosmopolitan now, and it seems that the Czech Republic, in particular here in the region around the capital, is becoming a really modern, actually, enterprise. So clearly people becoming more rich, more open, more sort of looking towards the world. So I think it is really time for addressing the energy issue. So it would be very strange if you become part of the global modern society, but you still feed your energy from the most obsolete sources, that is coal and nuclear. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, because I have been advising the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, with whom I had dinner just 2 days ago, for 25 years now. And Germany has engaged on its energy transition. And there are many myths and even lies about what is going on in Germany, so I tell you what the truth really is when it comes to nuclear, coal and renewables. But I have also been member of the so-called Coal Commission, a commission, civil society, not the government. 28 members of civil society were put together in order to come up with a phase-out plan for coal use in Germany, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So let me see whether it all works. So this is just to remind everybody, I mean, you have seen graphs like this. If you would be a shareholder of a company, and this would be the stock market index, now what would be the trend in your view? Is it going up or down? I think it's going up. Everybody would. Still, there are people who say it's stagnant or it's even going down. This is the curve of global warming, and of course it's a wiggly curve. There are years when there is a downward trend that has to do with El Niño and other things. But all in all, we see that since the Industrial Revolution, we have a global warming of more than 1 degree centigrade. And if you think this is not very important, then you should think of the planetary mean surface temperature as something, the result of many processes. It's a little bit like your internal body temperature, you know? If you leave this room and it's 10 degrees colder, no problem. But if your body temperature would drop by 10 degrees, you would be dead, of course. And 1 degree warming means that you would feel uneasy already. 38 degrees body temperature. 2 degrees mean you have fever, and 5 degrees means you are dead. So whenever you hear about 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, and you think, my God, is this really important? Think of the body temperature of yourself and of the planet. So this temperature is going up. And of course, the IPCC has come up with a quite dramatic report. So I've been a long-standing member. You know, we earned the Peace Nobel Prize in 2007. And this is warning about the dire consequences of 1.5 degrees warming. But in order to understand why 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees is important, I'll show you this graph here. So that is a map I introduced, I think, at a lecture I gave at Oxford University in the year 2000. And I have already introduced this metaphor, this picture of the body temperature. Now, if you would be exposed to hyperthermia, that means your body temperature would be increased by 1 degree, 1.5, 2 degrees, what would happen? Well, some of your vital organs would collapse, maybe first the kidneys or the lung, finally the heart, the brain, and you would die. Now, these are the vital organs of the global environment, if you like. So you see the ice sheets, West Antarctic ice sheet, Greenland ice sheet. You see the big circulation patterns in the atmosphere, very important. The monsoon system, for example, 750 million Indian farmers depend on it. If the summer monsoon falls flat 1 year, this is a complete disaster for India. You have the big circulations in the ocean, the so-called Gulf Stream system. I'll talk about it later. And then there are the big ecosystems, the Amazon rainforest, the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef, which is the biggest living organism on this planet, stretching across 20,000 kilometers altogether. 40% of the coral reefs have died back already. So this is a major disaster. But finally, what you see is a band of wind, so the called jet stream, and it's really important for us here, because often people think, well, global warming, this is really bad for, say, Tuvalu, the Maldives, maybe also the Caribbean because of the hurricanes. But we here in Central Europe, we are not affected at all. That is not true. So this jet stream system is really important for us. This is a band of high wind speed, about 200, 300 kilometers, 10 to 12 kilometers above ground. And it is separating the cold Arctic air from our temperate area. And it's driven by the temperature difference. That's the important thing. So the other big issue, which is important for us, is here the Gulf Stream system. If you would put your finger on a globe, and you would start here with Prague, and when you would go to the west, always on the same latitude, where would you end up? In Alaska. But in Alaska, you have completely different temperatures. It's only because so much energy is transported by the Gulf Stream system here to Western Europe and Central Europe. That's why we have such a benign climate. But here is the jet stream system. So you can see it, the so-called polar jet stream. It's a system of this high wind speed going from west to east. And sometimes, as you will see now, this is over North America, it is creating these big, big bulges, waves, so-called Rossby waves. So it will be fixed now, immediately. And what you see is here, if this happens over the Great Plains here in North America, when very dry and warm air is going far north, even up to Alaska. Now, this would be a warm spell. In general, this wave is wandering to the east within 2 or 3 days. But what happens if this wave stays put for 6 weeks? Or the other way around, you see next to it, in the eastern United States, you see a cold wave going down from the polar. Now, if this would stay for 6 weeks, it would be quite disastrous. Now, the trend is that this will happen even more in the future. Now, you don't need to understand this picture. It's really complicated physics, something we discovered around the year 2000. But because of Arctic warming is 3 times the warming we have here in the temperate zone. So it's 3 times faster warming. That means the temperature difference that is driving the jet stream is becoming smaller. So it becomes more sluggish, and these waves become bigger, and sometimes they become stationary for 6 weeks, for example. This is a complicated resonance phenomenon. You can glean it from the wave equations. We have the data for it. To cut a long story short, it means that we will have much more extreme weather episodes in the future, also in Central Europe, actually. Yeah? So last year's summer in Germany was the driest and hottest on record. So more or less for 3 months we had no rain in eastern part of Germany, and I guess it was not much better here in the Czech Republic. This is directly the effect of the slowing down of the jet stream. And you know, when we tried to publish this in the year 2003, long time ago, no magazine was willing to accept this publication, because they said this is so far outside the standard science. And because it was rejected by every journal, I knew we were up to something really important. And so we published it again 10 years ago, and now it's an entire field. So this is very important. Now finally, on the climate science here, the most important thing is, this is a complicated picture, but actually it's a map I've shown to Chancellor Angela Merkel, and actually every politician and every entrepreneur should know it. So take a minute, bear with me, I'll walk you through this slide, because you know, in every lecture, if you recall your time as a student, there's always one moment when you have to pay attention, when you can fall asleep again. But this is now. Now you have to pay attention. So if your neighbor has fallen asleep, give him a kick, or her, whatever, gently, of course. But this is really important now. Because what you see here, I showed you this map of the vital organs. If you like, the kidneys, the heart, the brain of the planet. And this is now telling us when you turn up the heat, when will this be tipped into a new state? So you see on the horizontal line, the year 2000, that's more or less now, the year 2500, and when we go back 20,000 years in time, because we can reconstruct global mean temperature now over millions of years from ice core data. It's a fantastic advancement of science. So you see the line, the wiggly line, this is global mean temperature over the last 20,000 years. And what you see is first that the last ice age was only about 3 degrees cooler than pre-industrial. This is a tiny difference, actually. When our civilization started about 12,000 years ago, when we entered the so-called Holocene, the global warming phase, the natural warming phase we had, this is almost flat. Oh yeah, excellent. I can even use this one. You see here, this is the line, and here, this was 12,000 years ago. Civilization was born, agriculture was invented, settlements were built. Our civilization is only 12,000 years old altogether. Homo sapiens has been around for 300,000 years. And these are the scenarios how the future will be. This is here the temperature line. If everything goes right, we would settle global warming at 1 degree warming. But unfortunately, this is the business as usual line. So currently we are on this trajectory here. And if you go to the left, this means 8 degrees warming by the year 2500. This is the Paris range, 1.5 to 2 degrees. And here are the uncertainty bars, if you like, the error bars. When will the Greenland Ice Sheet melt down? When will the coral reefs? You see, these are big bars because the science has still to make them smaller and identify the right position. But you see, for example, that all coral reefs will die back already above 1.5 degrees warming. So if you want to do a trip to the Seychelles or the Great Barrier Reef, you have to do it soon, but please not by flying. You have to take a boat, because otherwise you will produce a lot of CO2. And who has ever snorkeled in a tropical reef? I mean, it's the most wonderful thing you can see on Earth. But this is doomed, more or less. It will all go. This is the Greenland Ice Sheet, and here's the West Antarctic Ice Sheet, and some parts of it have already been tipped into melting down. We cannot save them anymore. 30 years ago, we could have done, but we have lost so much time. And of course, if you go beyond the Paris Range, when you see this is the Gulf Stream system, this is the East Antarctic Ice Sheet, in the end, it would mean sea level rise of 60 meters. 60 meters. Now, I've shown this at the Munich Security Conference recently, where for the first time there was a plenary session on climate change. You know, you had all the generals and you had all the foreign ministers and defense ministers. And for example, there was a Russian delegation talking about the Crimean Peninsula, and I just showed them when the problem will be completely gone. There will be no Crimean Peninsula anymore with global warming. So you see, even generals should think about global warming. So this is what could happen when all these tipping elements would work together. And in the end, again, that's a complicated graph, but you will understand it immediately. You see, this is the timeline, 1950, the year 2000. These are the scenarios I showed you, global warming of more than 10 degrees, if we do business as usual. And when we go back in time, 60 million years ago, and actually this warming, which could happen within the next few hundred years, would push us back in geological time by 60 million years. This is the time when the ice sheets formed. So the Earth was ice-free at that time, but this took 60 million years to develop the new state. And we could redo it, undo it within just 200 or 300 years. So you see, humanity is a planetary force. This is not a joke. This is no fun, really. We're not talking about a little bit of environmental protection, tree hugging, what have you. We're talking about completely changing the makeup of this planet. And this will happen if we keep on emitting. And here you see the curve. Global emissions, in spite of all the climate conferences, in spite of all the IPCC reports, you see this is the emission curve globally. So we are just from energy use, industrial use, fossil fuels, at 37 billion tons of CO2. And you see it's going up and up and up. Here you see the various contributions. And here you can pick the various countries. You see here, is the national policy contributing to globally 1.5 degrees warming when you are in green? Or are you contributing nationally to 5 degrees? Now you can pick your favorite country. Canada, for example, is on a 5 degrees trajectory. Australia is. Algeria is. The United States are on a 4 degrees trajectory. And Central Europe is on a 3 degrees trajectory. The only countries who are in line with the Paris Agreement is Sub-Saharan Africa. But these are precisely the countries who will suffer most from global warming. So this is fundamental injustice. You see, those who contribute least to global warming will be hit hardest. So it's clear that we here in Central Europe, where we have the wealth, we have the technical intelligence, we have the democratic institutions and so on, we of course have to spearhead the fight against global warming. We cannot rely on Burkina Faso to do it. That would be very strange. So, what can we do? This was a report we did in Germany in the year 2011. It was the year when Germany decided to phase out nuclear energy after the Fukushima accident. Now, believe me, I've been to Fukushima, I've been to the reactor and so on. And this will be a forbidden place for many, many decades, clearly. Actually, in Tokyo, I talked to the Japanese government. they had already an evacuation plan for Tokyo, Yokohama region. You know, there are 35 million people there. This is the biggest urban area in the world. And if the wind would have changed, we would have to evacuate the Tokyo, Yokohama region. Can you imagine to move out 35 million people within a few hours of that region? Even in Japan, it would have been complete disaster. So we were lucky that the wind was not changing, actually. So Germany decided after that, I talked to the German Chancellor immediately afterwards, but we will have a phase-out plan for nuclear, and I show you what it means. So here, this is the truth about the so-called Energiewende in Germany. Because I had an interview this morning, and of course the question was, well, Germany, because of phasing out nuclear energy, we are sort of boosting now coal use and so on. And this is simply not true. Here are the figures. So what you see here is, and this is another slide where you should stay awake. So this is 100%. You see this is natural gas, others, so hydro energy and so on. This is lignite, soft coal. This is hard coal. This is nuclear energy in red. And this is the year 1990. When I met Angela Merkel in 1994, she said renewable energy for the power production in Germany will never exceed 4%. When I talked to her 2 days ago, she said I was wrong, clearly. Now you see the development. So you see that lignite, coal are more or less stagnant here. Nuclear is going down a little bit. Here's Fukushima. This is the plan, the German plan. Renewable energies here, we should go up to more or less 90% by 2050. And now I show you the real development. So you see I have a complete crossover now. This is renewables. We are even ahead of target. And what is going on with lignite? It's going down. It's not growing. Actually, most of it is exported to France and the Netherlands and Switzerland and Austria because we don't need it. Hot coal is quickly decaying. Nuclear is going down. It will be phased out completely by 2022. We are completely on track. But the renewables are actually even growing faster. So in February this year, 67% of all the power came from renewables, wind and solar. So I assume that by 2040, we will have 100% renewable energy for power production. No? So you see, Germany is on track. Now, I was a member of this commission here, a civil society commission, not a government commission. 28 members who voted with a 2/3 majority. And we devised a plan for phasing out hard coal and lignite coal completely by the year 2038. There is an option to do it even earlier, 2035 or even earlier. And this was a unanimous, 27 yes and 1 no. It's different from the British Parliament, you know. You follow the Brexit debate where this is a complete madhouse now. We had a clear agreement, 27 members, which you see here, including the industry, including the big energy utilities, including the trade unions, including the small and medium enterprises, including the scientists, the environment initiatives, and so on. It's an almost unanimous decision. And the idea is to sort of phase out at the latest as 2038. The final decision was made in a 21-hour session without any break. So you see, if you are an expert, you get punished. It was not fun at all, but we came up with a result. It had to be. So we are clearly online. Now globally, the only way to be in agreement with Paris is if we more or less double the use of renewable energy every 6 years, globally. Regarding the cost, it can be done. I show you this. So if people still believe nuclear energy is an option, when you should consider these figures here. It was done by colleagues of mine, a good friend, Don Farmer from Oxford University. And what you see here is the following. This is so these are the price curves in US dollars for the various energy sources. By the way, this is a logarithmic curve, you see. Every time you have another mark with this tenfold the energy. So it's a logarithmic curve. You see solar energy is going down like this. This is the price for coal. It's more or less flat. It does not include, though, the health effect of coal. You know, if you were to include 7 million people each year globally die because of pollution. 7 million people. This is not even included here. But if you just do the production energy, and this is the only curve that is rising in cost, is nuclear here. That simply makes no sense to invest in nuclear, let alone the fact that it is a non-renewable resource, because uranium has to come from somewhere. And you have actually just 2 countries in the world where you get cheap uranium at the highest possible quality, that is Canada and Australia. So this is not an option. We discussed it before, that actually 74% of the US coal power stations are already not competitive anymore with renewables. And in 10 years, it will be more or less all of them. So although you have very conservative states like Texas and Nevada, they are now the front runners in renewable energies. Why? Because it's beneficial in economic terms only. So it's nothing to do with ideology. You know, Donald Trump would like to revive in West Virginia the coal industry. And do you know how they do coal mining in West Virginia? They just blow away the mountaintops. They just explode them. You don't need any coal miners anymore for that. You just use a huge explosive, and then you come in with the big machines. So the jobs will be lost anyway. But this is, of course, destroying the entire landscape. Is this a sustainable development? Of course not. So let me just go to the final thing here. I was a member of the European Commission high-level panel on decarbonizing Europe. And this is the final report. You can sort of visit it on the website. I would highly recommend it to you. So it's for free. You can download it. It was a quite impressive group. It was chaired by myself and the Commissioner for Research, Carlos Moedas. And you should be aware that the next research framework program of the European Union will embrace 100 billion euros. So it's a really huge thing. It's called Horizon Europe. And 30 to 35% will be only dedicated to climate and energy projects. So if you, with your excellent universities and research labs, want to participate in that program, you should, of course, also go for these projects. So you see, we had from the finance industry, Christian Thiemann, we had Karin Vanguard, who is the mayor of Stockholm. We had Beata Jachewska, who I think was leading the Visegrad group for a while. And so on, Maria van der Hoeven here, who was the chair of the IEA and the former economics minister of the Netherlands. That's really a high-level group. So what we, in the end, if you go to the sectors, a main decision we made is we proposed to look at entire regions as transition super labs. You see a former coal mining region like Upper Silesia or the Lausitz in Germany, or a huge agro-industry region, and to convert it entirely into a sustainable region, where you look at all sectors, agriculture, industry, manufacturing, power generation, mobility, tourism, and so on. And why not? you have one of these transition labs here in the Czech Republic, and our recommendation is to provide billions of euro for the transformation. So let me see, finally. I had the privilege in Potsdam to work in the former office of Albert Einstein, who may be known to you. And actually the field equations, Einstein's field equation, were solved for the first time at the desk I had the privilege to use. And what Einstein said is, and this is my final remark, you know, the problems we are having now have been created a certain type of thinking. The Industrial Revolution, which started in Lancashire in 1750 or so, was of course a fantastic achievement. It has created modernity. Everything around us is the legacy of the Industrial Revolution. But now this thinking is coming to an end. Even if CO2 would not be a greenhouse gas, we would see that, you know, mobility, maybe not in Praha, but in all other cities, you are stuck in the traffic. Try to ride a bicycle in Beijing right now. 20 years ago, it was full of bicycles. Now you are in the congestion line all the time. So the problems of today cannot be solved with the thinking that created those problems. We have to do new thinking. And I give you just one hint. I mean, I'm completely convinced that renewable energies will outcompete fossil energies, let alone nuclear. Because in order to save the climate, you would have to build thousands of new nuclear power stations all around the world within the next 10 years. And you know, even the reactors we want to build in Finland, they cost 3 times the original calculated cost, and they just do not get ready. So there is no way really to do this, let alone, maybe also a remark for you, because I know there's a big debate about nuclear in this country. One of the first commercial reactors was built in Bavaria in Germany, near to my hometown. And at that time, the construction costs were 10 million Deutsche Mark, 10 million. The decommissioning to get rid of the reactor and to safely store the reactive waste costed 100 million. So you see 10 times the construction cost. So you have to factor that in. If you keep on running a nuclear power station, if you're even extending it, I mean, the cost will come not to this generation, but to future generation. This is very unfair, actually. But another thing which is extremely important, apart from climate change, there's one big mega trend on this planet that will change the future completely. That is digitalization, artificial intelligence, things like that. But this is the ideal thing of, for example, operating fluctuating sources of energy, like wind energy, solar, and so on. You need batteries, you need demand management, things like that. With neural networks, you can do it, and this is just, you have probably seen pictures like that. It's fantastic that these neural networks, and I happened to be one of the first people to work with that in the 1970s already. Now such a machine is training itself to learn a strategic game like Go or chess within 8 hours by just playing with itself. I mean, it's amazing what it can do. And we will soon have quantum computing, which will outcompete original computing by a factor of 1,000 or so. If you combine that, you see we have a completely new way of using our technologies. So it would be easy to solve our energy problems. So if you are willing to embrace the options of the future, it is possible to do this great transformation. And it will make us not only healthier, it will also make us wealthier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hans-Joachim Schellnhuber. Thank you very much for your opening speech. I don't know if you hear me. Yes. Thank you very much for your opening speech. And now is your time. If there are any questions, that yes, please.
Professor, thank you for the great talk. I have just one technical question. You have not mentioned the issue of geoengineering, because as you certainly and we all know that in the scenarios for the big change in global decarbonizing, there mostly is also mentioned this issue.
Thank you very much for this question. I deliberately did not mention it in order not to complicate my talk. This is, of course, a very important thing because the IPCC, the World Climate Council, is proposing, of course, on the one hand, we have to reduce emissions quickly. In my view, it has to be done by 2040, actually, globally. But at the same time, we say, well, if we are not able to reduce so quickly, we need to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. I'm not commenting on solar radiation management, you know, spraying sulfur into the stratosphere. This is complete madness in my view. It will create so many negative side effects, we should not even think about it. But removing carbon dioxide might be an option. I think the IPCC is on the wrong track here, because what we could do in order to draw down a lot of CO2, so-called negative emissions, would be to restore degraded forests, actually. If you calculate that, this is the easiest way. I mean, evolution has invented a magnificent tool that is photosynthesis. We are all based on that. Photosynthesis uses just water and sunshine and CO2. So if we help to recultivate degraded land, and there are millions and millions of hectares across the planet, you would not only restore those landscapes, but you would draw down, by the growing of trees, lots of CO2. So before we engage in some crazy schemes by Dr. Strangelove scientists, we should really just do the obvious thing, protect our best friends in the fight against global warming, the natural ecosystems. So I think renewable energy for mitigation plus protection of natural ecosystems and reforestation, actually, for example, in Africa, these two factors make up the complete equation. And I would really warn against this illusion, well, we go on like this, you know, we drive our big cars, we fly to New York City for shopping over the weekend. And then finally, when the world is warming up by 3 or 4 or 5 degrees, we ask some crazy scientists to invent us out of the problem. This will not work, I can guarantee you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I would have one more question about what you said at the beginning, that what was, or what is the most difficult obstacle in the strategy, how to convince the society and the politicians that decarbonization and global warming, all these topics are a serious threat, and not only topics for green politicians. And you also said that there have been a lot of myths and lies covering this process in Germany as well. So how to remove them? Thank you.
No, I have 2 answers to that. I mean, I've been warning for 30 years about this problem, not because I was not even an environmentalist. I was trained as a physicist and mathematician. I made a career in theoretical physics first. But because of the laws of physics, if you take them seriously, you can calculate the greenhouse effect. You only need quantum physics, thermodynamics, and fluid dynamics. These are the things which help us to operate a satellite, for example, a GPS system, flying a plane, and so on, using a computer. Everybody believes in physics when you switch on your computer. But when we tell you about the greenhouse effect, we say, no, I don't believe in physics. So it's completely crazy. Of course, if anybody here in the room is thinking that global warming is not real, I could put you to the test. You could actually climb up the roof of this building and jump down and say gravitation is not real, for example. So the laws of physics do not apply. I'm sure nobody is willing to stand that test. So what happened actually is that in the 1990s in particular, a number of fossil fuel industries started a campaign to distort the truth of climate science. And what they said, I mean, it's all well documented now, ExxonMobil and so on. You can read it in a book, for example, called The Merchants of Doubt. They said, we will not say global warming is not real. We will just sow some doubts, skepticism. We will say, oh, only 80% of the scientists say it's a problem. So let's rely on the other 20%. But, I mean, think of it. You would bring your children to the school bus in the morning. And where is the driver? And he would say, today we will have an 80% chance of a deadly accident. Would you push your children onto the school bus? Nobody would do this. It's ridiculous. But actually the consensus among scientists is 97, 98%. But why is nothing happening? And this is probably also relevant here for the debate in the Czech Republic, where the government says, well, if renewable energies are so cheap, well, go ahead, private household. You see, when you have a transformation, you are stuck in an old system which is very convenient, cheap, and so on. But there is a better system, but you have to make an initial investment. You have to push across a hill. So it's like you want to go down into a valley, but first you have to overcome a hill. Would you just sit there and say, no, I don't want to go up, I always want to be comfortable? So there needs to be made an initial investment. For a household, you have an old heating system. It may cost you 15,000 euro to replace it by a heat pump system based on renewable electricity. But many people would say, no, I don't have this 15,000 euro at hand. So you need incentives, you need a state sort of organized system, as we did in Germany, the feed-in tariff system. So whenever you want to go into a better world, you have to overcome an initial hill. So this is precisely what the people who are in charge of the government have to do. They have to create the incentives and not just point to the households and the private people and say, if you love renewable energy, just invest into it. So you need a societal push for it. So sorry for the long answer, but I answered actually two questions at the same time.
Yeah, thank you very much for answering. And please, do we have any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you for a nice talk. You show us these tables with the temperatures going up and down through the history. You showed us first 20 years ago and then 60 million years ago. If you go in these tables back, let's say 250 million years, in the temperature changes on the globe, there are many more jumps and downs. Yeah. What would be your comment if the people would say, okay, in this planet history, we've even seen much bigger changes than 5 degrees or 10 degrees. Yeah. There were many ones and we survived, the planet is keeping going on. So if you go really back 250 million years, it's much more changes than 5 degrees. Yeah. So how would you comment on this?
Oh yeah, this is the classic question, of course. So maybe you are a geologist, but you see what I try to make absolutely clear is this planet has gone through many, many evolutionary stages. Our planet is 4 billion years old. There were 2 episodes when it was completely glazed over. This is the snowball Earth, that was 600 million years ago. When we had, of course, very hot climates in the Carboniferous, when actually coal was created and oil and so on, Of course it was much warmer. But you said we have survived all this. No, we haven't. Homo sapiens only exists for 200,000 years. And as I told you, our civilization is only 12,000 years old. Actually, the modern civilization is only 200 years old. Now, if we would have now a shock, an environmental shock, that comes at 100 times the speed of the biggest shocks in the past, but we have 9 billion people on this planet relying on agriculture and so on. This is the perfect storm, as the American would put it. So we will not survive it, definitely. But of course, if you think it would be more comfortable and easy to survive in the warm ages of the Carboniferous, of course, maybe I should invite you to do some time traveling and to experience for yourself.
Thank you very much for your answering, for joining us, and for your inspiring speech.